Nikola Jokic may very well be a magician or some sort of wizard, somebody with evil magical powers or really cool magical powers if you're a Denver Nuggets fan. Jokic had a ho-hum triple-double. Jamal Murray made 6 threes. Denver as a whole shot over 50% from beyond the arc, knocking off the Grizzlies in a surprisingly competitive game, depending on who and why the Grizzlies were competitive within it. We're going to talk about that and more on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for joining me on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your co-host, usually when DeMichael Cole is with me, but your host for this episode of the show, post-game edition. The Grizzlies had a game on Monday night, recording this in the aftermath of that defeat at the hands of the Denver Nuggets. No DeMichael Cole, but you got me with you. Host here on Locked On Grizzlies, one of your hosts, but also a senior contributor over at Beale Street Bears. Going to have my next piece for them out this week. Heading into the holiday, make sure you're checking out Beale Street Bears. Make sure you're subscribed to our Substack over at Grizzly Bear Blues as well. Thanks for being with us on this edition of the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Now, the #1 sports podcast network out there. Thank you so much for helping us be a part of that process, making Locked On Grizzlies part of your everyday Memphis Grizzlies and NBA content consumption. Hopefully you hang out with us each and every time an episode drops. You're an everydayer at this point. If it's your first time coming around Locked On Grizzlies, we appreciate you being here. We hope you stick around a little while. The Memphis Grizzlies lost a basketball game on Monday night, and that wasn't a surprise. They were the underdog, right? The Denver Nuggets are an NBA championship contender. The only reason the Nuggets aren't the favorite to win in the Western Conference is because the Oklahoma City Thunder exist. I think that the Houston Rockets are a pretty good basketball team, but in a 7-game series, I'm taking this Denver Nuggets team because they would have the best player on the floor, and that is Nikola Jokic. He displayed that time and again in Memphis on Monday night. The game was at FedEx Forum against the Grizzlies, and a ho-hum triple-double, as I said in the beginning of the program. Felt very pedestrian, as crazy as that can be said out loud. Jokic makes phenomenal passes, one of the best passes you'll ever see. Make sure you're catching the highlight on social media, on ESPN, however you take in your highlights. You got to see the pass that he made in the closing minutes of the contest. It really was a beauty, and he just has such a remarkable handle on the game. It truly is like watching a maestro conduct his orchestra. Jamal Murray made 6 threes. The Nuggets looked every bit the part of a championship contending team. And when they see, if they see the Thunder in the playoffs, that'll be a fascinating series to watch unfold. But this is Locked On Grizzlies. This is not Locked On Nuggets. What the Grizzlies have going for them is Jock Landale, apparently. Because Jock Landale, who, if you are an everydayer to Locked On Grizzlies, you know I'm very skeptical Jock Landale. I'm a Jock Landale skeptic, to say the least. But on this day, for those of you that like to chastise me for my Jock Landale takes, I'm not going to do that here on this edition of the podcast. I'm going to talk about how he was on the court for a pretty long period of time in the fourth quarter later on in the show. But I am most certainly not going to belittle the game of Jock Landale in a contest where you could pretty easily say he was the best player on the court for the Memphis Grizzlies. Jalen Wells had a really strong contest as well. It was good to see him get his shot going a little bit, 4 for 8 or so, I believe, from beyond the arc. But Landale with his double-double, excuse me. Don't want to give him too much credit. A double-double for Landale, a career best in terms of his scoring and his overall productivity in the contest. And this was important because hopefully if you miss the game and you're just catching Locked On Grizzlies, you're like, wait, why did Jock Landale play so much? What happened to Zach Edey? Within the first few minutes of the game, Edey at some point took a blow to the head, either from Jokic or somewhere else. It's hard to exactly say where, but Edey takes a shot to the Chrome Dome, and Edey is eliminated from the rest of the contest. He's not able to return for the Grizzlies, and that's obviously a major problem. As soon as one starter, Jaren Jackson Jr., in this particular contest, who we'll talk more about later on in the show, as soon as one starter returns, another one drops out of the lineup. Zach Edey, hopefully not too serious, and he'll be back in the mix for the Grizzlies here soon. Again, a head injury that made Edie miss the rest of the contest. Only played about 5 or 6 minutes. But Landale was there when the Grizzlies needed him most, and he deserves credit for that. And he was aggressive on the glass, and he was aggressive at the rim, and he was exactly what Memphis needed on this particular night in order to remain relevant in the contest. Again, the Denver Nuggets led for a majority of the game. That's important to point out. They had a 4-point lead at the end of the first quarter. They had an 8-point lead at the end of the second quarter, at the end of the first half. It was an 8-point lead going into the final frame, and then the Nuggets outplayed the Grizzlies 32-30 in the fourth quarter. So it's not like the Grizzlies were blown out in this contest. That's not fair. If you watch the game, there were ebbs and flows like most NBA games have, but the Grizzlies competed, and they did so admirably, considering that they have no Ja Morant, considering that they really don't have any true point guard on the floor. That matters. That competitive energy matters, and that is something that DeMichael and I talked about on yesterday's show. If you missed it, or on our previous episode of the show, DeMichael talked about building an identity. This team looked identity-less until Zach Edey returned. And then lo and behold, in the last 4 games or so, the Grizzlies seem a little bit more gritty, a little bit more grindy, a little bit more willing to toss and mix it up. And that is an identity. And it's one that helps you compete in games against superior talent. And there's no denying that the best player on the court in Grizzlies Nuggets was Nikola Jokic. There's no denying that the second best player on the court in Grizzlies Nuggets was Jamal Murray. When the Grizzlies at best have the third best player on the court, and it's fair to say that that wasn't even necessarily true in this contest, right? Peyton Watson had 27 points for the Denver Nuggets. He was probably the third best player on the floor in the game. So when Denver has the number 1, number 2, and number 3 best players on the basketball court in the game, and you only lose by 10, I'm not advocating for moral victories because this is professional basketball. This is the National Basketball Association. But context matters. We just spent time at the start of this show lauding Jock Landale. And Jock Landale as a reserve is much more palatable. And Jock Landale in this current role, I think, is much more sustainable as opposed to what he was to start the season for the Grizzlies. But he comes off the bench. He essentially absorbs that Edey role once more. And he is a challenge for the Denver Nuggets team. And he deserves credit for that. Cam Spencer continues to play with high levels of intensity. That is something that you can count on from Cam Spencer. 18 points. Really impressive job shooting the basketball. 3 for 6 from beyond the arc. Cam Spencer is going to give you productivity. You had opportunity to compete in this game. You had a chance to be in the fight. It was an 8-point game going into the fourth. It was a single-digit lead. And the Grizzlies just weren't able to get over the hump. Whenever they would get it within 5 points or something like that, a Jokic 3, a Murray 3, some sort of big bucket would take it all away from the Grizzlies. But it's important to come out of this contest, at least in my opinion, not feeling discouraged. Again, the Denver Nuggets are 13-4. They are a legitimate, at worst, third best team in the Western Conference. Probably the second best team. And in a year where the Oklahoma City Thunder didn't exist, they would be the prohibitive favorite to make it out of the Western Conference and be the representative for the West in the NBA Finals. The Grizzlies were not embarrassed in any way, shape, or form in this game. They lost, but it wasn't turnovers that killed them. The Grizzlies only had 11 turnovers in the game. It wasn't free throws that killed them. The Grizzlies made more free throws, than Denver did. It wasn't rebounding that killed them. The Grizzlies were only -6 in that area. And again, that was without Zach Edey for a vast majority of the contest. The Grizzlies hung around. The Grizzlies fought. The Grizzlies competed. The main difference, Denver made 22 threes and the Grizzlies only made 16. Denver took 43 threes and the Grizzlies took 47. So do the quick math on that, dear listener, dear viewer. That means the Denver Nuggets shot 51% from beyond the arc as a team. The Grizzlies shot 34%. Sometimes the other team just makes more shots. And that's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about this particular contest. And obviously the other team always scores more points if they're the winner, because that's how you win basketball games. But I don't know that there's some major think piece that needs to come out of this when it comes to rotations or when it comes to how the scheme was developed, the Denver Nuggets just played better. And considering the gap in talent, I know we hate moral victories, but the reality of the situation is that is an impressive performance from a Grizzlies team that was undermanned compared to the Denver Nuggets team. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to talk about Isolo and culture and what a standard is. And again, if he had done certain things, would the outcome of the game have been different? Probably not. But I do think it's interesting to see as he's trying to differentiate and dictate what the standard is, how he's going about that. I'll give you some examples coming up next year on the show. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Robinhood. Nobody knows your money goals better than you. Robinhood puts you in control of your money with tools that work as hard as you do. Locking in on every opening, beating your PR, beating it again. Channel that drive into your money. Robinhood puts you in control of your money. Take stocks and ETFs, options, futures, and crypto all in one platform. You can now build and execute your own trades from a desktop with Robinhood Legends advanced tools, or take advantage of the new Robinhood strategies with a tailored portfolio managed by a team of experts. You expect more from yourself. Expect more from your money. Get started today at Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Again, that's Robinhood.com/yourmoney. Your money, your move. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by DripDrop. Ooh, when I'm hydrated, everything just works better. My focus, my energy, my mood, my skin. That's why I've been using DripDrop. It's doctor-developed hydration that keeps me running at full power no matter what my day looks like. DripDrop isn't your average sports drink. It delivers 3 times the electrolytes, half the sugar of leading brands, using a science-backed formula trusted by medical professionals, firefighters, and over 90% of top college and pro teams. I like using DripDrop as my daily routine, or part of it. I'll mix a packet in the morning before I go to work out. During a midday slump, it gives me some energy and it actually tastes pretty amazing. My go-to flavor is the delicious fruit punch. It's become my secret weapon for staying sharp and energized through long days. Right now, DripDrop is offering podcast listeners 20% off of your first order. Go to DripDrop.com. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA. That's DripDrop.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNBA for 20% off. Stock up now before the heat hits hard later on this year, and keep your body and mind performing at their best with DripDrop. Joe Mullinax here with you on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for making us part of your everyday consumption of NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content. And thank you so much for making Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network out there. Very exciting, very grateful to be a part of that puzzle. Tomas Isolo has puzzle pieces that he's trying to figure out how they fit together, right? And again, as I've been hard on Jock Landale, I've been hard on Tomas Isolo. And Isolo does not get much gruff from me coming out of Grizzlies Nuggets. As I mentioned earlier in the show, you could easily argue Denver had the 3 best players in the entire game all on their team. The talent differential was pretty clear. The Grizzlies played hard. They gave their best. Just wasn't enough. Sometimes that's how things work. That's how the ball bounces, the cookie crumbles. Insert your favorite phrase here. What caught me off guard was how Isolo handled the end of game situation. Because you could pretty easily have made an argument for players like Jaren Jackson Jr., players like Santi Aldama, those guys not getting back into the game late in the contest. You could have made that argument, okay? And here is why I say you could have made that argument. First, let's start with Jaren, right? The one guy who you would label as a star on the roster. And I put star in quotes for those of you watching on YouTube. Jaren is a star, right? I don't want to give ammunition to the folks that irrationally hate Jaren Jackson Jr., but Jaren's coming off of an injury. Jaren has had a unbalanced, maybe is the fairest way to put it, start to the season. Folks concerned about his defense. They're always concerned about his rebounding. His offense has been efficient, but he hasn't had enough shot attempts. We've talked about that on recent episodes of the show. Could see and use more from Jaren. Jaren goes 7 for 16 in this particular contest, but 1 for 8 from beyond the arc. Jaren only attempts 1 free throw. Jaren only attempts 1 free throw in the entire game, and that means that Jaren was 6 of 8 on 2-point shot attempts, but 1 of 8 on 3-point shot attempts. So what does all of this mean? This means that he was settling. Jaren Jackson Jr. was not being physical. He's not trying to get to the rim. He was not trying to draw contact. Maybe his ankle was still bothering him. It's important to point out he was questionable going into the game. He had double ankle braces on. Maybe Jaren was not physically feeling it. If I am Tuomas Isalo and I am trying to establish what a standard is, whatever that means to Isalo, the way that Jaren played would not be up to that standard. Jaren had 4 assists, but Jaren also had 3 turnovers. Jaren was a minus 27 in the game. A minus 27. Single game plus minus is a stat that you use at your own risk. Always take it with a grain of salt. But to me, it really stands out in this contest because the next closest Grizzly in terms of negative plus minus was Cam Spencer at minus 10. So for those of you that don't understand how plus minus works, Jaren Jackson Jr. in the 29 minutes that he was on the floor for Memphis, the Denver Nuggets were 27 points better than the Grizzlies. That number goes down to 10 when Cam Spencer was on the floor. So the Nuggets still outperformed the Grizzlies when Cam was on the floor, and there's lots of context and reasons for that. But you don't often see a gap that large between Jaren and Cam in that particular instance. So Jaren did not help with winning the basketball game, to say the least. If he's not healthy, if you're just looking at the numbers, the effort, however you want to phrase it, he's not getting to the spots you want him to get to, sitting Jaren would have made sense. But Isalo decides to bring him in with about 2 or so minutes left in the quarter at the end of the contest. Why? When the game was still in the mix earlier, the Grizzlies were only down by 5 a couple of minutes prior, but it was Jock Landale, it was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope on the court. It was not Jaren Jackson Jr., it was not Cedric Howard, who we'll talk more about to close out the show here in a moment. Those are 2 guys that you would think you would want to get into the game a little bit earlier. And this is where somebody says, oh, well, minutes restrictions. Guys might be hurt. Why are you giving them such a hard time for adhering to minutes restrictions? According to ESPN's box score, Cedric Howard played 27 minutes. Jaren Jackson Jr. played 29 minutes. Especially in the case of Ced. But even Jaren, you could have gotten him in a minute or so earlier. If you were concerned about getting your theoretical best player on the floor. If you wanted to make a point, you should have just kept him out completely. And then in postgame, talked about how Jaren was coming back from his ankle. He wasn't comfortable. You could tell he was struggling. Want to move on to the next one. And then internally, you could talk about the things that Jaren needs to do to improve, whether it's health related, if his ankle is indeed still bothering him, or whether it's just not settling for outside shots and getting to his spots inside. Jaren Jackson Jr. didn't have it in this game. Why put him back out there at all? What is the Isalo standard? What are your expectations? What, as a coach, are you looking to get out of the decisions that you make with regard to playing time? I think that's a fair question to ask. And again, this is not the Grizzlies could have won scenario. I don't think the Grizzlies, 9 times out of 10, they lose this game. I do think that. The Grizzlies lose this 99 times out of 100, probably, the way that things played out. But why keep playing Santi Aldama? Santi Aldama was tied with Jalen Wells for the amount of minutes. But Santi didn't have it in this game, as well as Santi has played of late. And again, Santi had other good numbers, 6 assists to 1 turnover, 6 rebounds, 4 stocks, 2 steals, 2 blocks. But in terms of his shot, Santi was 5 of 16 from the field, only scored 12 points, 0 for 5 from 3. So do the math on that, dear listener, dear viewer. We love math here at Locked On Grizzlies. Jaren Jackson Jr. and Santi Aldama were 1 for 13 from beyond the arc. The Memphis Grizzlies aren't winning many basketball games where that's the case. But again, they only lost by 10. And 2 of the highest paid, if not the 2 highest paid players that logged minutes in the contest were 1 for 13 from beyond the arc. Why was Santi out there so much? When you had a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope who was giving you some decent minutes, when you have a John Conchar, and I far be it for me to argue for John Conchar, you got the John Conchar experience, only 2 shot attempts in the 8 minutes he played. But Cam Spencer could have gotten a few more minutes. Cam Spencer had a pretty good game. Cedric Howard only played those 27 minutes I mentioned a moment ago. Vince Williams Jr. only played 24 minutes, was not as much of a factor down the stretch. What is the standard? What are you trying to state when you make the choices that you do in terms of the rotation directions that you go in. And when you do have players that are struggling, like a Jaren Jackson Jr., like a Santi Aldama, what is the logic behind when you reinsert them in games or when you keep them out of contests if they're not performing up to the level that they're supposed to, or at the very least, the way that they're supposed to be giving effort and attitude within the schemes that you're trying to implement? I think that's a fair question to ask. So again, don't need you to get into the comments and complain about, oh, it's on Isolo with Joe all the time. No, Isolo did fine in this game. I thought it was interesting how he chose to reinsert Jaren and the guy who we're going to talk about more to close the show, Cedric Coward, putting them in when the game was almost out of reach. Certainly enough time had elapsed where it got more difficult for the Grizzlies to get back into it. In theory, Cedric Coward and Jaren Jackson Jr. are two of your best players right now. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Jock Landale are not. If you wanted to say Landale and Caldwell-Pope are playing well and you wanted to reward playing with effort and doing what you're supposed to do, I would have been cool with that. But that's not how things played out. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this edition of the show talking about Mr. Cedric Coward, how he needs to have some larger roles delivered to him moving forward. See how I did that? The old Cedx, right? Stick around here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Game Time. Basketball season is officially here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. But let's be real. Getting tickets can be a total headache. Between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout, it's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. That's where Game Time comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NBA tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. I love that what you see is what you pay. There are no hidden fees at checkout, and you see exactly what the view is going to be from your seats before you buy the tickets with the in-app seat view feature. They also have zone deals that are a game changer where you pick the section and Game Time picks your seats while you save big. You'd even find NBA tickets for under $25. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Closing out this edition of Locked On Grizzlies, thanks so much for being with me. Joe Mullinax here with you. And I mentioned Cedric Coward, right? I'm a big Cedric Coward guy. And I think that what the Grizzlies have done to bring Coward into the fold and have him be invested and essentially give him the chance to be the starter that he should be. Could it partially be because of injury? Maybe. But I do think that Cedric Coward is taking advantage of all of the opportunity that he is being given, and that matters. I am of the mind that more opportunity needs to be given to Cedric Coward. The young man who has garnered a new nickname thanks to JJ at Grit Grind on X, Cedx, right? Again, at Grit Grind. If you haven't seen that image, I highly recommend you check it out. Shout out to JJ for a great thought a few days ago that went viral on social media. Cedx needs to have some more opportunity delivered to him. And I think that when you watched what happened with the Denver Nuggets, we talk about the talent gap. Cedric Coward is one of the more talented players on the Memphis Grizzlies. He has physical abilities, the length, his scoring touch, all these different things. And again, he's a rookie. You don't want to put too much on a rookie. But in the current state of play for the Memphis Grizzlies, you probably should put a little bit more on him in terms of what your expectations are, going back to what we talked about earlier in the program, for being a contributor on the offensive end. Cedric Coward played 27 minutes, only took 6 shots, only scored 5 points. Cedric Coward, probably one of his worst games of his season so far. But 6 shots. You know who took more shots than Cedric Coward? Vince Williams Jr. You know who else took more shots than Cedric Coward? Jock Landale. Times 3. Jock Landale took more shots than Cedric Coward. Cam Spencer took more shots than Cedric Coward. What do all those players have in common? They're not as good as Cedric Coward, and they certainly do not have as much invested in terms of draft capital in them as Cedric Coward. So Cedric Coward moving forward, and again, Would Cedric Coward have taken 12 shots? Did the Grizzlies win the game? No. I don't think it impacts the outcome. But I do think that at 6-12, the Grizzlies need to start having a more macro view of things. You have a month to go until Christmas, and I am Mr. Call Me at Christmas. I'm not advocating for a trade. I'm not saying that a guy should be gone. None of that. You have another month or so, and then again with the injury updates to Ty Jerome, and you'd imagine one for Ja will be coming out in the next week or so. It may be call me at MLK Day, right before or a month or so before the trade deadline. But the reality for the Grizzlies is this. You are not a good basketball team as presently constructed. You're not. It's possible that we never know how you're presently constructed because of all the health issues and concerns that are not necessarily anybody's fault. It's a tough draw, tough luck. Maybe there's some voodoo going on, some burial ground that needs to be unearthed of, Grizzlies mascot's past or something like that. I don't know. But maybe the Grizzlies are just kind of doomed to this middling fate where they're fighting for the 10th spot in the play-in. And if they don't get it, you have a solidified lottery pick. Would that really be the worst thing? We're kind of hovering around that moment. And you need to prepare Cedric Coward for when this team is good again, because we are operating under the assumption that that is the plan. You've got a max contract guy in John Morant. You've got a near max contract guy in Jaren Jackson Jr. You've invested a lot of money in those two guys. I imagine you did that because you're planning on winning, or at least trying to win. Moving on from Desmond Bane, maybe that was more of a tanking move than we realized. And even some of us like me, I said it was a move that felt like a tanking move when it happened. The Grizzlies didn't get better out of the result of that trade. It got better down the road. The organization was in a better place. If the Grizzlies are going to embrace this soft tank, which again, don't get mad at me, 18 games in at 6-12, maybe you should embrace the soft tank too, dear listener, dear viewer. Cedric Coward, if that is indeed reality, he needs more than 6 shots. He needs more touches. He needs to get the ball in and around the basket. He needs to be a slasher. He needs to be a creator off the bounce. I don't want to see him being a primary initiator because I don't think that's his game. But they have to find ways to get him off of screens, get him into advantageous situations, game plans so that he is in a spot to get into a rhythm. On most nights, it's going to be the way that you're most competitive because he's one of your better offensive players. But even in a game like the Denver Nuggets, when you were very unlikely to win that game, no matter how well things go, that was a chance for the Grizzlies to try to get Coward some good looks against a competitive playoff level team, a potential championship winning team. Guys on that Denver Nuggets roster now won a championship a few years ago. It was a chance to get him more touches and to get him more engaged and involved. And maybe that's Cedric's fault. Maybe he was too unselfish. Maybe he wasn't looking for his spots and his shots. Maybe the Denver Nuggets deserve a little bit more credit. Maybe they were pushing him off of those spots, being a little more physical. We saw that with Zach Edey, right? Maybe it was a freak accident that happened with Edey being knocked out of the game. All sorts of reasons could be a way of explaining what happened with Cedric Coward not getting the offensive shots you'd want to see him get and the offensive priority that you would want to see him get. But that has to be a focus moving forward because the Grizzlies need Cedric Coward if they are going to be better when the team is healthy, whenever that is, 2 months, 10 months down the road, whatever the case might be. They need Cedric Coward to be a producer of offense regardless in particular. Give him those chances. Make sure you prioritize him in those moments. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated. Make sure that you are checking out Locked On Fantasy Basketball for your second listen today. Josh Lloyd, host the #1 fantasy basketball podcast, giving you daily tips and helping you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The next time that we're together, DeMichael and I will be back together. It'll be the Wednesday edition of the show where we'll be previewing Pelicans, Grizzlies. The Pelicans looked pretty good against the Chicago Bulls on Monday night. This may not be a layup kind of game like we thought going into it. Derek Queen and others with the Pelicans starting to compete a little bit, starting to get after it a little bit more. So good for the Pelicans, right? Let's have a competitive cup game if we're going to have to watch an NBA Cup game after all. We'll talk about that and more, I'm sure, on our next edition of the show. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts. Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, YouTube. Make DeMichael and myself part of your everyday NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. Every time an episode drops, hang out with us here in our little corner of the internet we like to call Locked On Grizzlies. Until we are back together again, have a great rest of your day, your night, whenever you're checking out the show. We'll catch you next time here on Locked On Grizzlies. See you.